So we've come to the first ceremony that we're going to do for working on our energy body and energy body hygiene. Now, what I want to say first off is that energy body hygiene, just like everything else that has to do with your physical body's hygiene, like brushing your teeth or wiping your bum or taking a shower or washing your hair. This isn't something that you do one time and then you're kind of like done. All the hygiene parts of keeping a healthy energy body are things that need to be done on a fairly regular basis. And my hope for you is that just like, you can feel when it's time to brush your teeth, even though preferably you should do it twice a day, right? But sometimes between meals, you're like, you can feel that there's something kind of in there and it needs to be done. Similarly with your energy body, that you will get to this level of sensitivity to your own energy body that you know what you need to do and when. But we're going to start today talking about cord cutting and contract burning. And I want to just remind you of something that I will continue to bring up as we move through this program, which is I don't know everything. And the reason why I say that is because I see way too often people talking about these non-material things in really certain terms, like they know exactly how. And I really think that that's a testament to how little somebody knows, because when we can talk about things that exist in the material world with pure certainty because we know, I can prove to you that gravity works. But when it comes to these kind of subtle things and the things that are invisible, it's a very personal experience. And so there's this kind of idea, right, that if I can convince you that I'm the only one who has the truth, then I can sell you anything. And that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I want you to develop your own discernment and your own ability to know for yourself. So what I'm asking you to do is to listen to me, but to discern for yourself. And what I don't want to do is to go into this work telling you that it's definitely this or it's definitely that, because that's not the reality that I live in when it comes to the invisible world. The invisible world is always changing. But I do want to come back to this kind of metaphor that I have of the flute. The reason why is because when I talk to you about the flute, I've added these holes to the hollow bone, right? The idea being that you can then choose in which environment you want to open one chakra and which environment you want to close them, so that it's a conscious play of your own energetic structure. And I want to go further into this today as we talk about, the energy body and energy body hygiene. So here's another image of this kind of donut of how energy flows, or, a torus, which is the more proper word for this energy formation. But as you can see up there on the top, you see fear, how it compresses the person's energy field, makes it a lot smaller, and how love is very expansive. And there is this awareness that the heart has such an enormous magnetic field that it's actually several kilometers that we can measure somebody's heart frequency. It's much bigger than the brain. So, and when you see this torus, you can see that it actually emanates through and from the heart. So what's the kind of stuff that we're working on when we're talking about energy body hygiene? Well, it's not just the stuff that's happening in your conscious. It's also stuff that is getting stuck in your subconscious, stuff that happens in your unconscious, and then also stuff that's happening in the supra-consciousness. And I'm going to explain these terms more in depth as we move into the crown chakra. But for today, just be aware that these things that we're talking about now, there might not always be things that you can see, touch, or feel. There's also this element of things that, we need to clean up from. Like, what is it you need to keep your energy body hygiene? What is it you need to clean? Well, it's other people's stuff. It's stuff that we pick up from the environment. And it's also things that aren't material. So things that we can't see, touch, or feel, or smell. Things that are existing in other dimensions. There's a lot of stuff going on in the 4D dimension, or the fourth dimension, but there's also other dimensions that can come into and affect our energy body. So I want to talk a little bit about how, what things can happen. So apart from the flute, there are other sort of holes or tears that can happen in our auric field inside of this torus. So I've kind of mapped it here, and excuse the drawing, but I was trying to show you sort of a picture. So these are just a few things that can happen, but talked about this kind of idea of like heavy stuff, when you build up stuff, or things that you repress and suppress, things you deny in yourself that then get stuck inside of your hollow bone, inside of your tube. In the physical space, it's like, if you eat a lot of heavily processed food, for example, and your body can't absorb it, it might not get pooped out. It might actually get stuck as toxins and get really heavy in your lymphatic system. And that's on the material energy, but similarly with energies in the energy body, right? So then there can be things like debris. So this is like, when we're just not getting grounded, so we don't have a way to release it because we're just not connecting with the earth, because it's through the earth that we let stuff go, right? And that can leave us feeling really scattered in our brains. We end up with this kind of feeling of stagnant energy. There's a feeling of like being dirty somehow, being heavy. Then there's things like rips and tears, which we have in our auric field. So these happen mostly through like traumatic experiences, right? And there'll be a feeling of like energy loss. And when we have rips and tears, not only can energy kind of leak out, but we also have, we are now vulnerable and open to energy kind of seeping in. There's also like, the difference between a rip and a hole is that a hole is like a rip or a tear, but just way bigger. So the same sort of situation, but it's just amped up in volume on all the levels. And when you have big holes is also when you're kind of open into, spiritual possession and negative attachments, like dark entities that can kind of come in and take up space in those places. But today, what we're going to focus on, the part of energy body hygiene that we're going to focus on today, is the energetic cords, or etheric attachments. And these attachments are not only to people, but they can also be to places or objects. And they are another way that we cause leaks and depletion of our energy, but it can also be something that we do to another. So we can actually be the person who is taking energy from other people, because let's be honest. And this is where I want to talk about this idea of being an empath as well, which a lot of people have kind of really enjoyed calling themselves, like, I'm an empath. And empath is not a psychologically recognized word at all. We call ourselves highly sensitive. That is psychologically recognized. But an empath is a kind of made up new age word. In English language, we would say that a person is empathic, or that they have high levels of empathy, but there's no such thing as an empath. And in my understanding, and again, you don't have to agree with me, and if there's going to be a healthy discussion coming out of this, I'm all for it. But I do feel that calling yourself an empath is refusing to work on yourself in some way, and just putting your hands up and saying, well, this is just who I am. But it's also quite narcissistic, because then you are refusing to work on your energy body by just saying, well, this is just who I am. But you are also making other people's emotions be about you, so that you might be uncomfortable that somebody else is feeling something, and instead of allowing them to have that feeling and processing it, you kind of take over and make it about you. This is a much deeper conversation that I'd be happy to continue if anybody's interested, or if anybody feels triggered by this. I do apologize, but I also do think that it's a really unhealthy self-image to have, that you're some kind of vulnerable empath, where it's more like that there are issues in your auric field that can actually be resolved. Not to say that you shouldn't be empathic. That's a very nice thing to do for other people, but when it kind of becomes where you suffer and you make other people, and when you take other people's emotions from them, it's really not healthy for anybody, and it's not a good thing in my book. So what we're going to do today, I want to just repeat, it's not a quick fix. And there's many different kind of schools of thought about how to do energy body healing and how to remove these energetic cords. And as you can see here, I've made it's a kind of a graph that goes from all energy cords are bad to they're mostly bad to some of them are bad and some of them are good. So let's talk about the idea that all energy cords are bad. So this is a kind of old school Buddhistic, Hinduistic philosophy that's based on the idea that what we are here for on the earth is to become liberated, to leave the samskara, the endless suffering cycle of death and rebirth. And so when you create, they call it runamabanda, or bondage with people, when you are bonded, when you create bonds with people, and we bond with people in many different ways. It can be emotional, it can be intellectual, it can be through work contracts, all sorts of ways that we bond with people. Every bond will further and further tie you into karma and keep you in the cycle of death and rebirth and coming back over and over again until little by little you free yourself from these bonds. Which is why, if you've gone to a yoga class or you've seen kind of how people greet each other in Asia, they won't shake hands, because when you shake hands and you touch people, you are creating bonds. So when you put your palms together in front of your chest and you greet people in that mudra, you're kind of showing I'm separate and you're separate, as well as saying we are ultimately one and the same, but I don't want to create this bond with you. So a big thing for me on my journey was to understand the difference between detachment and non-attachment. So detachment is similar to being disassociated. I don't want to be involved in the world at all, whereas non-attachment is a conscious continual choice where to not be attached doesn't mean that we're not interested. We can be massively interested. For example, if you're watching a movie, you can be really interested in the movie without being super attached, right? You can cry because the ending's sad, or because, it's so beautiful or whatever, but then you finish the movie and you get on with your life, which is very different from being kind of detached and being completely disinterested in what's happening. So that's one part. When we then say, should we have attachments in this life? What does it mean to love somebody? Shouldn't we have some energetic exchanges with those? Well, this is where different schools of thought or different types of people have different opinions. And I do think it's really important to think about, who's saying what and why, because a lot of these kind of old school gurus where spirituality was to sit and meditate in a cave, well, obviously for them, having no bondages at all, no relationships at all would be what makes the most sense. But if you're, quote unquote householder living in a family, then you're going to have bonds, you can't not. But I'm sure some of you have thought about, the kind of bonds that we create with people when we have sex, for example, and the type of energy transfer that when you have sex with somebody, you are not only connecting with that person in the here and now, you are taking their full energy body in, which they're, they might smell nice if you use your actual nose, but if you were to smell their energy body, they might really stink. So again, this is, the more aware you become, the more clean you are, the more you'll be aware of it and pick up on these type of vibrations. So if you go to the other side of the screen, some attachment could be good. So the number one attachment, and this is really the fundamental one, is between the mother and the child, where after the baby is out of the mother's body, there is still this enormous connection where the mother is still responsible for the child. The mother is still feeding the child from her physical body, but also energetically. And I'm sure you've familiar with, how tired a mother is for the first few years of the child's life, because she's not sleeping, because she has to be that attentive to her child's needs. So I'm going to move on. Well, let me just say as well, some people feel that in this lifetime, what they really want to do is to be devoted to a cause. That's an attachment. Other people feel that it's their dharma to live completely free and liberated of that. So that's their choice, So I'm not going to say all attachments are bad, get rid of all of them. I'm not going to say, you have to have them. I'm going to say, feel into yourself, understand why you have the attachments that you do. I think that we do want and need other people to understand us. A lot of people say that one of the most fundamental human needs is belonging. But there's a difference when we start to manipulate others, or we need other people to validate us, maybe when we need somebody else to show us who we are. Where some of these things, it's really better, I do really believe it's better to figure out who you are from inside of yourself, and letting other people be your mirrors rather than your deciding factors. We're also going to look at today energetic attachments, as in non-human and subconscious contracts that might not only be contracts that we made in this lifetime, but might be contracts that we made in our past life, or might even be contracts that we didn't make but that our ancestors made, or they might also be contracts towards the future. So these are some images that I found on the internet, and I just wanted to show you kind of the differences in how people show these things. So as you can see, there's different kind of locations for, on the picture on the right with the man and the woman, these kind of different types of attachment. So from heart to heart is generally like a healthy I give to you, I receive from you energy, where it's I don't give to you to receive, I give to you because I love you, and I receive from you because I love you. Whereas from my understanding, it's generally been, and again, it might be different from people to people, but when the attachment cord attaches to your solar plexus, the person is literally just sucking energy out of you. And again, this is where we need to be really honest with ourselves, because sometimes I'm the one who's taking from others. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with you if that's the truth. But if you realize that you are being, or that you are the taker, today is a really good opportunity for you to let yourself go and let that person go and release them. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next slide, which is another kind of picture of different types of attachment cords and how they might work. It hasn't happened to me, but I'm sure that you can understand the idea too, that again with sex, that if you have sex with somebody and it's a purely physical connection, it's just pardon my French, it's just fucking, it's just animalistic, there's no deeper level, then that connection is not going to be heart to heart. It is going to be more sort of genital to genitals, right? And again, not necessarily helpful if you are wanting to spiritually grow. So what do these kind of cords look like? Well, it's up to you to look for yourself. For me, I have seen them look as kind of the ones from my heart. I quite often see them as colorful or sometimes golden kind of cords or strings. Sometimes ropes, they can be thicker or thinner. And sometimes from the lower chakras, they've been snakes, or I even had one time that I had to release that was like a big, thick, heavy metal chain. Yeah. I had one as well that was sitting around my ankle at one point. I had a really heavy one at one point that was attached to my shoulder. So there are no kind of set places, at least in my understanding. It can be very different to how we experience things. So I don't want to tell you what you're going to experience or in any way force you to have the experience that I'm having. I think it's really important that you have your own. But things that can happen with these energy cords, like ways you can notice that this is going on, are things like having obsessive thoughts about a person, or getting stuck in like negative self-talk where you're like, this doesn't really feel like my stuff. I know for me, you know, I can go into a space with somebody who has a lot of unconscious material in their energy field. And what happens with the energy transfers of unconscious is when I receive it, it's not conscious, right? So it gets unconscious in my energy field. And then little by little afterwards, I start going, something is a little bit uncomfortable, but I don't really know what it is because it's unconscious. And then little by little, you know, it's working its way through my system and I start to make it conscious. And it's a really long process. So, and sometimes that stuff doesn't want to be conscious. So then there's a real resistance in me to do my energy body hygiene work. So sometimes you're just feeling really drained. Sometimes it's like, you know, you tell somebody, like putting a boundary, you know, like, please leave me alone, don't contact me, and they just keep coming. Sometimes it's dreams that let you know that there's still some kind of attachment. Sometimes it's physical, that we start to get sick, or we have anxiety or depression. Sometimes you can kind of feel it because you're getting stuck in these karmic loops. So even though it's not the same person that you're going through the same pattern with, you're like, oh my God, like this just already happened with somebody else. And then it is some kind of attachment, and it might not be to a person, it might be to an object or to a lesson or something where there's, you know, it's just stuck. They can also be, you know, in so many different levels. Like it can be an attachment to something in the astral realm, in the etheric realm, in the mental realm. So it doesn't just have to be to people. It can also be that you've got an attachment to an earlier version of yourself that's kind of preventing you from moving on. So I think, like I've said what I needed to say. The last thing I want to say is that this ceremony that we're going to move into requires from you primarily to surrender and radical, deep honesty. Otherwise, there's not much point to it if you're going to bypass and deceive yourself. This is not a quick fix. And the more honest you can be and the more you can surrender to the process, the better it will be. So for these two ceremonies, what you're going to need for the cord cutting ceremony is about 10 to 20 minutes. You're going to need some kind of string or cord. If you have natural fiber, that will be better because we are going to burn it in the end. If you can. If you can't, if you have something plastic that you don't want to burn, you can skip that part. You will need something sharp like scissors or a knife. If you're going to burn it, which I recommend, then to have some kind of fireproof bowl, matches, or a lighter. And then afterwards, a little bit of time for you to self-reflect, maybe journal or meditate, or if you want to go for a walk or go for a swim or have a salt bath or jump in the ocean or go for a run or whatever you do to kind of get grounded with yourself. For the contract burning ceremony, you're going to need about 2 to 30 minutes. Well, it depends on how many contracts you have to burn, right? A paper and a pen, a fireproof bowl, matches and lighter, and then some time again at the end to self-reflect, journal, and meditate. So I'll let you gather those things, and then when you're ready, I've decided to do the ceremony as an audio. There's nothing much for you to see, and that way you can kind of pause it and take all the time that you need to finish. So there'll be 2 separate audios, one for the cord cutting and then one for the contract burning ceremonies. So when you're ready, move on. It's time to grow.